All right, what's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be going over how to guarantee your junior golfer gets better consistently without burning out. I think this is probably one of the topics that I see parents struggling with the most and trying to understand. And this video is really going to give you some context on this. So if you enjoy videos like this, please go ahead, leave this video a like, comment, and subscribe if you're new to the channel and you want to get more videos like this. So let's dive into it. So big picture here, if you have a junior golfer, the biggest thing is obviously we want to get better at golf, right? That's the whole point of doing anything. We want to get better. And the caveat to that is, are they doing that consistently? So are they going up and down, or is it kind of consistent, like nice positive trend where we're just getting better and better and better? And making sure that they don't burn out. So if they have to like practice 9 hours a day every single day and they can't focus on school, then obviously that doesn't work. Or if they just practice so much then they just don't like it, that's going to be a problem, right? If they're out there practicing and they feel like they're not getting better, they're probably going to burn out because we don't want to continue to do things that we put in a bunch of effort and we get nothing in return. And so those are kind of the constraints that you have as a parent. And so some of the problems that you're going to have is if you have a junior golfer, you're probably paying for golf lessons at some level or another. You might be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly lessons, but you're probably seeing a swing coach. And a lot of the times those lessons be kind of redundant. You might feel like your child isn't really retaining all the information or any of the information. You might feel like in between the lessons, your child isn't putting in enough work in order to improve. And your child is probably going to have a lot of emotional swings on how they feel about their game based on whatever their last few rounds were. If they played poorly, then they might look back on their game and say, oh, well, this is a big problem in my game because it was a problem last time they went out and played. But it might not be a problem in their game overall, right? And so that's the real challenge that we have when we're trying to improve junior golfers is, how do we get really clear about exactly what's going on in their game? And how do we take the emotions out of it and systematically solve problems? That sounds very dry, but golf is such a complex game and there's so many emotions in it. It's very valuable for you to be able to sit back and say like, okay, cool. What objectively do we need to work on? And how is that going to translate to improvement as fast as possible? And how do we see that improvement? Because I'm sure every one of you watching this has experienced this. Your child might play better, but they don't necessarily score better. And a lot of the times, kids value themselves and their talent as based on whatever they scored in their last round. And the reality is you're going to have to work on stuff that it doesn't always correlate to score. But it doesn't mean you can't measure it and you can't show that you're improving. And in my experience, if you can show a kid exactly how their game works and what they need to do to improve, well, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to commit to doing the work because they see, okay, well, if I put in the work, I get the result. Even if it's not lower scores tomorrow, they can see overall trends that are moving in the right direction. And that can be really, really powerful because if we're able to have consistent actions that we know are the right actions for a long enough period of time, then progress is guaranteed as long as we're doing the right things. And it's much easier to figure out what the right things are, because if every time you go out there and practice and you get worse on an average basis, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in this video, well, then you're not like, you can see that and say, okay, cool, I need to do something else. If you're doing the same drill over and over and over again to fix a particular problem, that problem's not improving, well, then something's wrong. You're not doing the right drill. You're not doing it the right way. You can solve that problem. Whereas you just go out there emotionally and be like, I need to hit it closer. Like, based on what? Based on you saw some guys on the PGA Tour hit it close, so you think the issue, the reason that you shoot 80 instead of 72 is because you don't hit it close enough, or your golf swing doesn't look good enough. Like, a lot of those times, that's the conclusions that junior golfers come to, and that's not really what it should be. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. But now I'm going to kind of give you something a little bit more tactile that you guys can kind of sink your teeth into here. So first things first, this hopefully goes without saying, but you need to have something that your junior golfer tracks their stats with. If they're not tracking their stats, they can't be in a phase where they can realistically believe that they're going to get way better at golf. If you're a beginner golfer and you're just trying to get them out there and get reps, amazing, cool. That's definitely the best way to learn. Once they're through that phase though, once they're out there, they like playing golf, they want to get better, they need to track their numbers. If you're spending all this money on, lessons and all that, but you're not tracking their numbers, you're just burning money. That obviously lots of people do that, but every elite junior golfer I've ever worked with, they know their stats backwards and forwards. They know where they need to focus. And having worked with lots of students, I know that this stuff works, whether they're shooting 95 or 75 or 65. This stuff always works. So it's the first and foremost, the most important thing is to clearly define the problem. And in order to do that, we have to have our stats. So once we've established that, you do not want to be looking at round to round statistics. That's not very helpful. If you just see how you did in one round, it's almost as useless as just looking at what you scored. That's just how it is. And so my minimum basis that I look at rounds based on is on a 10 round basis. So how's the player performed over the last 10 rounds? If we don't have at least 10 rounds, we're not really looking at much. We don't have a real data sample that was there. So it's very difficult to say, what does this player's game look like? At the same time, this is one of the reasons why I really don't like doing tons and tons of in-person lessons, is because of how a player is going to play when I'm watching them. I don't know. And it's very probable that they're nervous and they want to perform well. And maybe they perform worse, or maybe that they perform better because they're more focused. I don't know. But if I see 10 rounds of tournament scores, I can have a very clear picture of exactly what their game looks like, versus on a day-to-day basis, I'm going to get a lot of randomness. And so when you're trying to help your child, we want to cull out as much randomness as possible. So anyway, my preferred tool is Draw More Circles. And so there's a lot of reasons that I love it, but one of the biggest reasons is that I can easily sort through different data sets here, and they do a pretty good job of having the right information, talk to their CEO a lot. They do a really good job of like updating and making it better and better. So if you guys are in the market, this is one that's really good. But I like to look at 10 rounds here. You can also do custom. Custom can really be amazing, especially if you make a change to, let's say you go from like conventional, or your child goes from conventional to left-hand low putting. Well, then you can say, okay, cool, over this date range, like what was the prior date range of, let's say, 5-10 rounds? What's the date range since? Did your putting improve or did it get worse? Maybe it improved from, inside 7 feet because we're better at hitting our start line doing left-hand low, but our lag putting got worse. Maybe we changed our putter and, our putting improved or got worse. You want to be able to see those kinds of things. You want to be able to take notes on those kinds of things so that your junior golfer can consistently refine their game. That's really the key to all this stuff. You want to have consistent improvement. You got to be able to look at what you're doing. Then you'll be able to strategically say, I'm going to change one variable, a scientific process, and see what happens, right? We have a hypothesis. We run an experiment, and then we evaluate what happened, and then we make another hypothesis, and we run an experiment. And that's the process of getting better at golf. Like, if you just stop watching this video right here, that's this process. So I'm just going to be showing you guys really how to do that. And so 10 rounds is the starting point. The other one that you want to be able to filter out is tournament versus practice, because these are not the same thing, right? You might have a situation where a player has a massive gap between their practice and their tournaments. One of the most important things we want to ask is why. A lot of the times it's very easy to look at that and say, well, their mindset needs to be better. You're like, okay, what does that mean though? Like, are they on the first tee and their hands are shaking and they can't move their body correctly? That could be a possibility. It could also just be like, well, they're just not as aggressive as I think that they should be. Like, I don't know what that means. Versus if I'm able to say objectively and be like, well, in practice, you hit 70% of your greens, but in tournaments, you hit 40% of your greens. And specifically in tournaments, you hit 40% of your greens because you don't hit any of these par fives in regulation. So what's going on with this like second and third shot? Now we can get crystal clear about what's going on. We know it's a strategic problem. And maybe there's some nerves in there, but a lot of the times some kids like play better in particular areas. So it's not very helpful to say, oh, well, this is just a mindset issue. It's like, we have to be really clear about what's going on there, but all these things get connected together. And if your junior golfer isn't measuring their stuff, well, of course they're going to have a mindset issue because their expectations are going to be all screwed up. So that's the other thing that's amazing about tracking your stats is you can say, well, this is actually my average. And if I do anything better than my actual average, then I'm improving. And if I can just have smaller increments, then that's going to help me a lot more than thinking I need to go shoot under par or deep into the 60s or whatever. You can really just say systematically, if I can just improve my 3-putting rate just a little bit, that's going to have a big impact. So anyway, you want to be able to separate out practice and tournaments, because again, you might have a situation where practice gets worse, but tournaments get better. Okay, cool. We wouldn't flip that, right? And so that's something you need to accept, is like sometimes the point of practice is that you get better tournament results, not the other way around. And so it's important to know what the main thing is. So this is just one of my students here, Ben. He's, playing in tournaments the last 10 rounds. He's improved by 3 shots since the first one here, February 3rd. He's played a few 9 rounds because he's 10 years old. So from December up into, it's April right now. Not tons of tournaments. This is definitely going to heat up here. But we improved by about 3 shots. And he's playing against older kids. But that's where he's at. But that's not really the kind of important thing. This is one of the things I like about circles is that they do like these charts, which are pretty helpful. And drill down metrics. I'll kind of go into that in a second. But these are the ones you really want to be like aware of. Like greens and regulation, huge, super underrated statistic. This is probably the best statistic that you guys can look at for just how are we going to shoot. And what I mean by that is if you're a junior golfer, let's say, this is ridiculous, but let's say they hit 80% of their greens, ton of greens. They're going to shoot low scores. Like, it's just like you're going to have a hard time shooting over par because some of those are going to be close. So we're going to make some birdies. And because they're not going to hit every ball to 40 feet. Like that just doesn't make sense in a shot pattern. So it's like if we hit 80% of our greens, some of them are going to be close. Sometimes we're going to make putts just because pure chance. And we're probably not going to 3-putt that often. And we're definitely not going to 3-putt more than we would make bogey from not getting up and down because you might get up and down 70% of the time, which would be amazing. But if you 3-putted 30% of the time, that would be horrible. So you're probably not going to do that. And so it's very easy to shoot low scores. So that's one of the most important numbers you guys want to look at is greens regulation here. The next one you want to be looking at is birdie conversion rate because that's going to help you understand if I hit the green, how often do I make birdie? And the other side of that coin is how often do you 3-putt? But in general, if you just increase the greens regulation number, you're going to shoot better scores on average. So always just push that up as high as possible. Yes, I understand at the PGA Tour level, there's some decisions that they can make about like, oh, well, at St. Andrews, the green's too big, middle of the green's a bad decision. Fine. I understand that. Same thing with like Pebble Beach. There's some small greens. Sometimes you have to hedge away from the middle of the green. I get it. But for the vast majority of junior golfers, if they just went out there with the mentality of let me rack up as many greens as possible, and when they have that 60-yard shot that they bladed across the green because they're trying to hit it close, it's just better off if they just say, hey, let me just hit this on the green somewhere. The target gets way better. They loosen up, they hit it on the green, and they probably slide it to like 15, 20 feet, which is all they were going to do anyway. And so from there, they 2-putt and understanding that every time they make par, it's a good score instead of being like, oh, I should have made birdie. And that's really the mental part of the game. So you want to have those. Scoring average can be helpful, especially if you're looking at like par 5s. A lot of times, most junior golfers play these actually over par. They think that they need to make birdie, and then they actually play it worse than they should. So that's just something for you guys to keep in mind, but not super important here. Next one that's important, off the tee. A lot of people think fairways matter. They don't. But what really does matter is penalty rate. So, and recovery rate is kind of like secondary. Recovery is like if you hit it in the trees. But penalty rate is huge because penalty rate it's a shot penalty. And so if you have a junior golfer and they just cut down their penalty rate, that's going to be massive for them in their scoring. That's hugely, hugely impactful. And so if you change nothing in their game, you don't change their golf swing or anything, you just get them to have fewer penalty shots, that is going to drop their scores significantly. And so I'll get into kind of the rates of improvement and all that and how this stuff ties together. But just that alone can have a massive impact. And a lot of the times that's not even a mechanical thing. Sometimes that's like, well, I'm trying to draw and fade it off the tee, and just moving to one shot shape that they hit instead of two cuts that down because now they have more margin for error. Or maybe they're hitting driver in scenarios that are just like way too tight, right? Or they might have the converse scenario where they never hit it out of bounds, which is fine. That's good. But they're laying up all the time. And that's a big problem. So we need to encourage them to push the ball off the tee. And they might say, yeah, but I'm worried that I'm going to hit it out of bounds. It's like, all right, cool. Let's see that come out in the stats. Because if it doesn't come out in the stats, then we're just making a statistically better decision. But if they're like, hey, if I start hitting driver more often, because there are also people out there that'll say like, well, you need to hit driver on every hole because that's the mathematically correct thing. It's like, well, not if you start hitting it out of bounds 10% of the time. And so this is why this is so important, is to be able to have the perspective of how to solve these problems. And you can't do that without the data, right? You're just going to be at the mercy of a golf coach being like, oh, well, this is what the math says. And you've got your 13-year-old and they're like, okay. And then they go out and they shoot 85 and you're just like, what's going on? It must be their golf swing. Let's go get more lessons. It's like, this is not the best way to improve. So that's the next one we want to be looking at. That's also going to impact your greens and regulation, because if you're hitting it out of bounds all the time, well, it's going to cut down on your greens and regulation. If you just hit it and play more often, you're going to hit more greens because you're not out of bounds. You have more opportunities to hit it on the green. So that's that one. Then the next one I like to have just a pulse on is scrambling rate. I understand that it's not a perfect representation of short game skill, but Ben's pretty good here at 45%. But it really helps you understand what happens if you miss the green. Because the kind of big pivot point you guys should be seeing here is if we hit a ton of greens, we will shoot low scores. And then it's like, okay, how do we maximize once we're on the green? So that might be birdie conversion rate and minimizing 3-putt rate. And how do we minimize problems when we miss the green? So that would be out of bounds. That would be not getting up and down. But also, and a lot of people don't talk about this, also just like not missing the green on your third shot. You miss the green on your approach shot, fine. Hit it on the green so you make bogey at least. Like, don't put yourself in a position where you're so interested in making par that you make double and triple. Because I'm sure if you look at your junior golfer scores, they go out there, they shoot 85. It wasn't because they bogeyed themselves to death. It was because they probably had like an 8 on some hole, right? And so understanding that those are the things you need to be wary of, those are the things you need to watch for, not that they didn't get up and down. That's what's going to have the biggest impact on their scores. So sometimes accepting bogey is actually going to get your junior golfer better scores pretty quickly. And so you need to have a process to go through this stuff, be able to quickly understand it, help your child understand it, and then have them execute on it, and then measure it and make sure that you actually are getting better. And so this is why it's hard to get better at golf, because there's a lot of variables here. And this is just tournament numbers. This isn't even looking at practice numbers. So the last one here, we're going to look at detailed view for putting. And we're going to go right to 3-putt rate. So 3-putt rate's the last one. It's really going to tell you how many shots you're losing just on the greens. And so 3%, essentially PGA Tour level. Anything better than that's amazing. But realistically, like if you're at 5%, getting to 3% doesn't really do that much. Again, I'll show you guys those stats in just a second, but it doesn't really have that big of an impact. But a lot of junior golfers are up at like 10, 15%. And so just having that perspective, being able to say, okay, cool, this is a problem, is going to help them a lot. So those are the main statistics your junior golfer should be looking at. All this other stuff about like proximity to the hole, I need to hit it closer, forget all of that. Just look at those variables. If you improve that, if your junior golfer improves their greens regulation percentage by 10%, that's a ton. Like that's a massive improvement. And they might just be able to do that by intent. Just being like, I'm going to try to do this more. So that's that. And the reason that I approach it this way, I think it's crazy that people don't approach it this way, is I am a fitness guy. So like that's what I do daily is I go to the gym. And when I go to the gym, I log all of my stats and my workouts. So I see like, here's what I did. And so next week the next day, I do more reps or I do more weight. And here's like literally what that looks like here. Let me bring all these up for you guys. Just screenshot it. So this is the app that I use. And, we can see Tuesday of last week, I did 27, 21, and 13 bicep curls. And so this app is saying, okay, cool, you need to get 28, 22, and 14. So we're just bumping it up a little bit. And I'm going to measure that. And I have kind of like this periodization chart here that shows me where I'm at for the week. Your junior golfer needs to be doing the same thing. They need to be able to see where their scores are at, where their practices are coming out at, and how that they're progressing, because that's how they're going to see, like those overall trends. And that's what I do with my students. But anyway, those are the main numbers that you guys need to be looking at. So let's go ahead and kind of take this a little bit deeper here. And I'll pull this up. So this is a chart that I made for my students to help them understand where they need to prioritize this stuff. And so you see here, penalty rate, greens and regulation, scrambling, 3-putts, birdie conversion rate. And I built this because I wanted to be able to show for my students where they need to put where they should put their effort that's going to give them the highest ROI on their time, right? So if we can accomplish anything, like we can accomplish 10 different things, which most golf coaches end up doing, right? They come into a lesson and they give them like 5 new things to think about. And that's not very helpful. I want to be able to say, let's work on the same thing and let's work on it for like months at a time to be able to make a dent. So let's just show these numbers here. So this is column number 1 here. And let me just make this a little bit more reasonable here. So what I'm doing is based on these numbers, the junior golfer should shoot 77.35 on average. That's based on playing par 72 golf course. So if their scoring average is 79, then I know that we're losing 1.65 shots to compound errors. I've done all the calculations on this, so it's just something I give my students. But I know that they're losing 1.65 shots because they're scoring 79 and they should be scoring 77.35. So instead of, the lowest hanging fruit I know right off the bat isn't to even get this player to literally do anything, any one of these statistics better. It's just like hit the green when you miss the green. Don't four putt. Like, don't do anything like crazy, but being able to show it a kid that like, this is where you're at. And then every time they go and play and they don't do that, and this number ticks down gradually to like 0, or even it becomes like positive where they're actually doing a little bit better than they should be doing, then that's encouraging for them to be like, okay, cool. I didn't shoot the best score ever, but I didn't make any big mistakes. And I know that that's going to help me on the average for the long term. But that's that. Then we want to go down this checklist here and say like, okay, cool. If we go from penalty rate from 6.49, I like to take 5% off. So I say, what does that do? And this is the little improvement tally here. So if I improve by 5%, everything else stays exactly the same. Improve by 5%, that's worth 0.9 shots off my scoring average, right? And so again, I still have this compound errors stuff here. But let's just say like we're just worrying about these variables here. That's what that's going to be worth for me. Now let's go back and say, well, what if I instead devoted my attention to hitting more greens? That'd be cool. 0.81 shots, right? So not as good, right? I can say objectively, if I work on off the tee penalty rate, it's better than working on hitting more greens. If I get better at scrambling, everyone says short game is the most important thing. I've said I think short game's hugely overrated. If I just improve my scrambling, which again, to be fair, is mostly a statistic on how good your putting is more than it does how good your short game is, it's only by 0.36 shots. Okay, cool. If I improve putting by 5%, can I get it down to 2%? Probably not. So let's just say it's 3%. 0.73. Okay, so again, even though I don't like that I am, three putting 7% of the time, highest ROI is going to be in this penalty rate. I'll just do this last one for you guys as well. 0.54. So if I make more birdies, hit it closer, make more putts, it's only worth 0.54. So again, here, just not hitting it out of bounds, just not hitting it at hazard, that's going to be worth that much to me. So that's something to kind of have you guys' perspective shift there a little bit. So let's just say, I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you how your junior golfer can actually map this all the way out to like a 72 or 74 scoring average. Then I'll even show you beyond this where like a tour player would be at and why they started to look at things differently and why something like strokes gained becomes profoundly valuable to them because they're shaving margins on the edge. But just so you guys can see this, I'm going to highlight this. We're going to go ahead. We're going to say again, well, what if I took this down to 0? Because that's essentially possible. Now it's only worth 0.27 shots, right? Okay, so that's not the answer anymore. So I can accept, get out of here, dictionary. I can accept that I hit it out of bounds every now and then, as long as it's not a big deal. Like as long as it's not the biggest impact. So 0.81, okay, contender. This one doesn't change, 0.36. 0.73, again. And then 0.54. Okay, beautiful. So the next biggest impact, improve greens and regulation. That becomes the next focus. Now I should note in here real quick, the average player on Junior Golf Scoreboard improves by about 1.18 shots per year. And so by that logic, this is the improvement they would make if they just did this. If they just improved their penalty rate, and these are their numbers, which isn't, these aren't too crazy off. Based on that, they could spend 9 months doing this and just focusing on that one issue and be on pace to improve as average. And so when I work with students, they improve by about 2.71 is kind of my trailing number. I've made a few adjustments to my program. Now it's about 3.48 per year. And it's just by, a lot of the time it's just by doing this, having the right things to look at. And then we can really dig into what do they need to do with that information, what drills to do, all that stuff. But it's going through this process because these problems don't take 9 months to figure out. They might take 3 months to figure out. But if you can improve by 0.3 shots per month, well, now you get really close to 3.48. It's actually a little bit better than 3.48. And so being able to have focus on this stuff for a long period of time, that's the key to consistent success. Consistent actions for a long period of time doing the right stuff. That's always what leads to success. And the biggest challenge that we all face is we get distracted. And junior golfers, like all of us, they need to be reminded more than they need to be taught. And so once they have the foundation, this is kind of like the process here. So I'm going to continue this for you guys, just so you can kind of like, model this out in your own head. So again, probably not this one. I'm not even going to bother with that because I know it's like 2.27 or something like that. So let's see if we get this to, probably that one. So again, we're going to stay there. And so max out greens and regulation. And again, this is just saying everything else kind of stays about the same. Maybe we're improving a little bit. If you keep putting at the same level and you get more greens, like that's better putting. But this is keeping everything else pretty stable. And all the brain power is just going into how do I hit more greens. So again, can we get up to 74% of our greens? I'm going to say we can, but I don't think we can get past that. There are very few tour players that have over that. So I'm just going to say that's pretty much out of limit. And so we're probably not continuing to focus on greens and regulation. But if we just did that, these are our numbers. We didn't improve anything but our penalty rate and our hitting more greens. We're at the 74 scoring average, which is probably going to be like a +3 or a +4 handicap, especially if they're doing that in tournaments. So then from there, we're going to go ahead and say again, well, what if I took this down to 0.27? If I move this to 35.23. And you guys can actually see that the scrambling is actually less valuable as you hit more greens. So again, it's just one of the reasons why the short game is just super, super overrated. Short game is more, don't make the compound errors. All right, so let's move on to 3-putting. Okay, cool. So now this 3-putting is worth putting some energy into. So that becomes the next point of focus here. Still within 5%, but that might take us a little bit longer, but we've hit our limits. So we've hit the limit on greens and regulation that we can hit. Now we're hitting a limit on our 3-putting. So that's no longer an option for us. Again, 0.27. Can't improve that. 0.23. Can't improve that. 0.67. Okay, cool. So now we want to make more birdies. That's going to give us the highest ROI. Can we do that again? Yeah, it's definitely reasonable to 30% birdies. So again, 0.67. And so now we're getting into tour player range. And so this is kind of like where I want to wrap this part here, is because you guys are seeing that we move through a priority system of saying, let me just first not hit it out of bounds. Then we said, I need to hit more greens. That's going to give me the biggest ROI. So we want to be digging down into circles, numbers, or whatever, figure out why are we not hitting more greens? Are we hitting enough of the par 5 greens? Are we hitting enough of the par 4 greens? Are we hitting enough of the par 3 greens? What numbers are we really lacking in? What clubs do we need to be hitting on the driving range? What are the right drills in order to be doing that? Are we trying to work the ball both ways? Can we simplify things? All these questions need to come up. If we go through that, we improve objectively. We've got the right question that we're asking. We're evaluating the right thing. Then we say, okay, cool. We pretty much hit an asymptote. We can't get past 75%. We're not going to hit 85% of our greens. That's ridiculous. If you could do it, you should do it. But most players can't. It's not really a thing. Same thing for 3-putting here. Now we can say, okay, 3-putting is the next thing. Is there a lag putting? Is there short putting? What's the issue? Fix it. All right, cool. Now we kind of get into the tour player range where we're saying, okay, I need to hit the ball closer to make more birdies, or I need to make more putts. And we want to look at the data to say okay, well, is the issue that you hit it on the green a ton of the time, but you don't hit it close enough? Or is it because we don't make enough 12-footers, 15-footers? That's going to be the next question. Then it's okay, well, why do we not make enough 10, 15-footers? Can we not get the speed right? Can we not get the read right? Do we need to go to an aim point class? You guys can kind of see how these things get very narrowed down. And so if you've got a tour player, these probably improve just because, they're a better player. But again, like a lot of the ROI for most coaches, if they're working with a tour player, is how do I hit it closer? So they're really working on their mechanics, trying to get that stuff tighter, higher quality ball flight, all that, because they already hit as many greens as they possibly can. They can't really improve that. And at the same time, they're like, well, how do I make more like 12 footers? And so that's what you see them working on. That's where you see the focus go. That's where you see the players separate themselves on, because they've already got this stuff sorted out. But if you got a junior golfer who's like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, they don't need to be focusing on that. They don't need, your 13-year-old doesn't need to do what Tiger did. They need to be focusing on being a 13-year-old and playing at that level. And so just kind of like as a high level, what I have all my students do, just like understand things clearly, is I have them track their trailing 10 rounds, a spreadsheet, so they can actually see how the trailing 10 rounds changes and improves, rather than just looking at the 10 rounds, because they can only see like I'm either doing good or I'm not. I want to make sure that they can see the overall direction of their improvement based on their average. And so hopefully this makes sense to you guys and gives you guys a clearer perspective on just how you should be approaching stat tracking and just like helping your child improve and see that they're improving. Because I think that's the biggest thing is that belief that comes from being able to see I'm putting in the work and I am improving. I am shooting lower scores. And then when they get the really good scores just on statistical variance, then they're like, aha, I'm doing the right thing and I feel good and it feels easy. The anxiety comes down, the burnout goes down. They don't have to practice nearly as much because their practice is a lot more high quality. But that's really the process, and that's how you get better results. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys. Hopefully this is helpful. If you would like help doing this for your junior golfer, I'll leave a link below. You can book onto my calendar, and we can see if I can help you guys out or not. But if you guys enjoyed this, go ahead, leave a like on the video, comment your biggest takeaways, and if you enjoyed, you want more stuff like this, then definitely subscribe to the channel. We're still small, so we're still growing. So all the subscribers are deeply appreciated and awesome. So I said, hope this video is helpful for you guys, and I'll talk to you guys soon.